Hello and welcome to Real Obscure. I'm your host Kevin, and each week I'll be taking a deep dive into the video vault to shine a spotlight on a forgotten film or cult classic, all while using a lot of alliteration and mixed metaphors. In tonight's episode, we're looking at the 1980s sci-fi survival horror Nightmare City. The movie was released in 1980 in Italy as Incubo sulla città contamina, and I do apologise for my terrible Italian there, and later in 1983 in the US it was released as City of the Walking Dead. It was a joint Spanish-Italian production and was directed by Italian director Umberto Lenzi. Lenzi was the director of The Man from the Deep River, which was the first Italian cannibal movie, and he also made Eaten Alive and Cannibal Ferox, so I think there's a running theme there. He also directed Ghost House, which was released in Italy as a sequel to Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. This was a very common practice in Italy where different movies from different series would be combined to create a new series of movies, in this case the La Casa movies, which feature a couple of original titles and also two of the House movies. Lenzi actually had his name removed from the movie and it went out as being directed by Humphrey Hubert, which doesn't sound at all like an Italian director and sounds more like a 17th century English fop. The movie stars Hugo Stiglitz, Maria Rosario Omaggio, Mel Ferrer, Francisco Rabal, and the wonderfully named Laura Trotter. So what's it all about? Well, I'm going to give you a heads up now, there will be some minor spoilers regarding the storyline of this movie, and I'm also adding a spoiler zone at the end, after the main show, so if you want to find out what actually happens at the end of the movie, then stick around for that. So the movie follows a TV journalist named Dean Miller, who is played by Hugo Stiglitz, and he is assigned to interview a nuclear scientist named Dr. Hageman, who is due to arrive at the local airport. As he's waiting, an unidentified military transport makes an unscheduled landing, so he and his cameraman, they decide that they're going to go check this out because they know there's a breaking story here. So after a standoff, the door eventually opens and Dr. Hageman steps out. And I honestly expected him to just go, "It's," because he looks so much like Michael Palin in a wig and a fake beard. That probably went over the heads of a lot of listeners, but if you know, you know. And at this point, all hell breaks loose. The plane is actually full of atomic mutants, not zombies. They're not zombies, they are atomic mutants. And there is this wonderfully glorious orgy of violence with all this fast frenetic action and extreme gore, which totally sets the tone for this movie. Now these guys are not zombies, I mentioned that before, but they don't behave in the same way as zombies. They're not slow, they don't shamble. Although they drink blood, they don't eat flesh. And they act with purpose. They're intelligent, they use guns. Hell, one of them flew the plane somehow. And that just sets this movie so far apart from the usual zombie fare of the era. It's worth seeing even just for that. Anyway, Dean Miller and his cameraman, they manage to escape the carnage and they head straight back to the news studio, where a troupe of dancers in some very stylish blue lycra have their top quality dancing interrupted by a newsflash from Miller, who is attempting to warn everybody about these mutants. However, the transmission is cut off when General Murchison, played by Mel Ferrer, orders a lockdown and threatens to blow up the studio if Miller attempts to say anything about this sensitive matter. So realising he can't alert everybody, Miller calls his wife, but she's already left to go to the hospital. She's a doctor and she's been called in to assist with an important operation, which will become relevant later. The movie then cuts to a romance scene between Major Holmes, who is played by Francisco Rabal, and his wife Sheila, Maria Rosario Omaggio. Major Holmes is called into the command centre to meet with Murchison, but before he leaves, he and Sheila have a discussion about these terrible clay sculptures that she's making. I don't mean they're scary, I mean they are just so amateurish, they really do look awful, and it's not deliberate. But she's making these monster face creature masks, which clearly is foreshadowing. We then cut back to the TV studio where the dancers are on air and they're doing their awesome dance routine, which really has to be seen to be believed. It's pure 1980s cheese. And then all of the atomic mutants show up and basically massacre everybody live on television. Clearly not lovers of contemporary dance. Miller is able to escape in the chaos, and he takes a car and heads toward the hospital to go and find Anna. And we then cut to Murchison and his staff, who are holding a meeting in a secure bunker. They discuss how the mutants actually attack people to drink blood as a way to replace their own damaged blood cells, which is quite a nice touch actually. Somebody has thought about this. After the meeting, General Murchison calls his daughter and her husband, but they don't answer the phone because they're planning a camping trip. And there's just this really funny scene where the timing is just so comedic, unintentionally, but as the phone stops ringing, a soldier just steps into shot and explains that they've been trying to call. It's just one of the very many unintentionally funny scenes in this movie. Now obviously the two of them have been planning this trip for a long time, and rather than go with the soldier who's been sent to take them back to HQ in safety, they decide to skip out and go off into the wilds by themselves anyway. We then cut back to Miller, who has arrived at the hospital but still can't get to speak to his wife because now she is assisting in a delicate operation. And then the power goes out. Yes, there's a scene where, again, the mutants have coordinated and are working to a plan, and in this case they're attacking the power station and they manage to knock out the whole grid. And then the mutants attack the hospital, and there is this amazing scene where, as one of them bursts into the operating theatre, the surgeon has a scalpel in one hand that he's been using, and he throws it with this absolute ninja accuracy. It is, again, there are so many unintentionally funny scenes. And so the hospital is now in complete darkness, and everybody is using flashlights to make their way out to the exits to try and escape. And to the movie's credit, this is actually a fairly effective sequence. It looks nice. They didn't use day for night. They actually shoot at night with flashlights as the only light sources, and it works pretty well. Now Miller and his wife Anna are reunited and they manage to escape. And at this point the movie then picks up the different threads of all of the different characters, intercutting between them and footage of Major Holmes flying around in a helicopter for reasons. And then this is interspersed with scenes with Miller and Anna discussing man meddling with science and the nature of man to abuse science for his own nefarious purposes, which just kind of seem to really slow the movie down a little bit. There'll be an action sequence and then they'll just stop and talk. But there is one quite nice shot where Miller is standing in a pastoral scene and there's a pylon behind him, an electricity pylon, which kind of, I guess they're making a point about science and nature. I don't know, but it looks quite good. Now, as I mentioned before, we will be discussing the ending of the movie in the spoiler zone, which will come after the main show, but there are just a few scenes of note that I wanted to bring to your attention. There's a great one where the atomic mutants just sit down and start drinking blood, and it is shot in this wide-angle shot, in this flat fashion, and I'm not sure why Lenzi does this, but there are a few scenes where he does this, and it is just so comedic. Unintentionally, obviously, but it's just a really, really funny sequence. And then there's another bit where Miller is fighting with a mutant who has a huge candle and whacks him around the head with it, and it is just pure slapstick. It's just so bizarre how funny this movie is at times. And then there's this really weird scene where Major Holmes's wife Sheila is sculpting her terrible clay heads, and she finds one of them has a bloodied knife stuck in it, and she obviously is upset by this because she thinks she's home alone, and she starts screaming, and then it just cuts back to her later and she's fixing it like nothing's happened. And one of my favourite scenes is Murchison's daughter and her husband. We catch up with them on their vacation, and it is the vacation from hell. It is the most boring, terrible time that they're clearly having. Again, wide angle, flat shot of their camper van. One of them sitting outside, one of them sitting inside, looking utterly miserable. It's like Withnail with his sitting down to enjoy my holiday thing. It is just so utterly comedic, and I don't understand. I'm no filmmaker, but I know that wide shots, flat shots like that are used for comedic purposes. Why did Lenzi not know this? And then just a few other general notes on this movie. The makeup on the contaminated, on the irradiated mutants is absolutely terrible. I know it was a low budget production, and I'm sure Lenzi was probably disappointed with the way they looked. But honestly, it just looks like they've got poop on their faces. It is just so terrible. And they keep doing these lingering shots of the guys in really bad makeup and all of these close-up reactions, and it just looks awful. But on the plus side, they're all very nicely dressed. They're not zombies who've risen from the grave, so they've got nice clothes on. They're wearing lovely houndstooth sports coats and comfy slacks. They look like something from, a men's fashion catalogue from the 1980s, which is always a plus. And the other point to make as well is the acting is atrocious in this film. Now, in their defense, I was watching the dubbed version. Maybe the original Spanish language version is better. I have seen other movies like that. For example, The Tombs of the Blind Dead has an absolutely terrible dub, but when you actually watch the Spanish language version, the performances are better and the script is better. So maybe we can give them a pass on that. Now, I watched the Blue Underground release on DVD, and there is an interview on that with Umberto Lenzi, and he was quite annoyed that they made him use Hugo Stiglitz. He did not want to work with him. He said he was a very stiff actor, and he wanted Franco Nero or John Saxon, which would have been great. Lenzi did actually get to work with John Saxon on another movie called Nightmare Beach, and then he actually had his name removed from it, just like Ghost House. In Lenzi's defense, though, I think he was a director who had a vision, and he didn't like it being compromised by the producers on the various movies that he worked on. And I know that's often a struggle for low-budget directors. There is quite a funny sequence, though, in this interview where he talks about the clashes that he was having with the production team and made a point that the producer was female, as if that was the be-all and end-all and that explained everything that was wrong with the production. On the plus side, it has this really good theme tune. It's maybe a little repetitive and overused, but whenever you hear this kick in, you always know that the action is about to take off, which is always a good thing. And there is a lot of action in this movie. For all it's a horror movie, it is very much an action-driven movie with a lot of stunt work, a lot of they're not zombies, I'm sorry, contaminated attacks, and it just really flies along. It's not a slow movie. One of the worst sins a bad movie can commit is being boring, and you can never ever say that this movie is boring. There is always something going on. Even the preachy man versus nature versus science stuff kind of goes pretty quickly. It's not terrible, it doesn't slow it down too much. And if you do find those sequences boring, you could always check your social media or look at your phone or whatever else it is that people do when they're supposed to be watching movies. But yes, one of the things that I really do like is the fact that the movie does just whip along, and it kind of reflects the frantic energy of the contaminated, of the mutants in the movie. They're fast-paced, they run. You know, they attack with speed, they don't shamble. And that's kind of reflected in the pacing of the movie. It's quite cleverly done. Again, whether it was intentional or not, I don't know. But the movie has a lot of very good set pieces, and it gets to them pretty quickly, and it gets through them quickly. It's not a boring movie by any stretch of the imagination. Now, among people who know about this movie, the ending is one of the things that they always bring up. We will be discussing that in the spoiler zone, but Lenzi did actually change the ending of the original script because he said he didn't like the way the movie ended. And whether he made the right decision or not, well, as I say, we'll be discussing that in the spoiler zone, so be sure to stick around for that after the main show. And that was Nightmare City. If you've seen this movie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. And if you haven't seen it, then give it a watch. Like I say, it's by no means a boring film, it's a lot of fun, and if you want to see a zombie movie done differently, even though they're not zombies, give this a go. This episode was written, edited, directed and catered by me, Kevin H. Shaw. Our theme tune, Für Manfred und Siggy, was created using Udio. You can get in touch with Real Obscure at hellorealobscure@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Blue Sky at realobscurepod.bsky.social and subscribe over at substack.com/@realobscurepod. Content from Nightmare City is used for educational commentary purposes under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, fair use, and remains the property of the respective copyright holder, presented here for the purposes of critique, commentary and discussion. No copyright infringement is intended, so please don't sue us. Okay, so with the main show over, it's now time to venture into the spoiler zone. Ooh, that sounded a bit dramatic. Okay, so if you've ever seen any kind of post-apocalyptic zombie film, even though these are not zombies, you will know for a fact that everybody is going to die in this movie. So let's start with Murchison's daughter and her husband. They are killed very early on in the movie. It almost feels like it's just padding that they added these two characters for no real reason other than for them to just die. They are actually killed by two of their friends who have become mutants, and there's no shock to it, there's no revelation. The friends just show up and kill them, and that's the end of their story. Major Holmes discovers that most of the military has been neutralized by the infected, so any kind of plan that the military had to combat them is out of the window. So he flies home and he finds that his wife Sheila has now become a mutant, and she's working on her terrible sculptures still. So he shoots her, and then we get a tracking shot to the piece that she's been working on, and this is the one that had so disturbed her earlier and given her nightmares, and this was foreshadowing or something. Really not sure what that was all about, but that's what happens. And meanwhile, Miller and Anna finally end up in an amusement park where the infected are still chasing after them, so they use guns and grenades to fight off these mutants as they climb onto a roller coaster. Holmes just happens to be flying past in the helicopter, and he sees them and tries to rescue them, but Anna can't hold on to the lowered rope and she falls, and we are treated to a fantastic dummy drop as this dummy just ragdolls its way down to the ground, bouncing off all of these struts and supports, and it actually looks quite effective until it hits the ground and you see the way the arm is bent. It's very clearly a dummy. And then comes Lindsay's rewrite of the ending, because at this point, Miller wakes up. Yeah, the whole thing was a nightmare. Nightmare City. It's right there in the title. So Miller then gets out of bed and starts talking to Anna about how he's going to the airport to meet Professor Hageman. And if this sounds familiar, then there's a good chance that you've seen a much better movie from the 1940s that uses a very, very similar ending. And I'm not going to spoil that movie because it is a classic, but if you know which movie I'm talking about, then you'll see the very clear parallel here. And then we cut to the airport, and Miller and his cameraman are there as the unidentified airplane lands, and just before the door opens, the text, "The nightmare becomes reality," appears on screen, and the credits roll. So it's either suggesting that Miller had a vision of the future or is stuck in some kind of time loop. But yes, this was the ending that Lindsay went with because he said in the original ending they actually escaped and he didn't think that was realistic. But, you know, it's a fun, silly ending for a fun, silly movie. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to sign off now. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of Real Obscure, and I'd love to get your feedback. Let me know what you thought of it. If you enjoyed it, any of the other movies you would like us to cover as well, and we'll see what we can do. So thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next episode of Real Obscure.